Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمنا بنور الفهم، وافتح علينا بمعرفة العلم وسهل أخلاقنا بالحلم، واجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. اللهم اجعل أعمالنا خالصة لوجهك ولا تجعل فيها حظا لغيرك. وصل اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. How's everyone
Alaikum
today?
assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh.
Alhamdulillah. I was just going to say, those on the online mustn't forget that I'm very cognizant of you as well. Alhamdulillah. So, Alhamdulillah, we have more people in class today. And Alhamdulillah, whether it be in person or online, Allah has afforded us another opportunity to study such things that will enable us to engage more closely with His kalam. And the only reason we want to do that is not for dry academic study, but for the purpose of attaining closeness to Him through His information, His revelation that He gave to us to come close to Him via. Alhamdulillah, in our first period, as we started doing last week, is that we are going to, inshallah, do Nahwu, if I'm not mistaken. That we're going to start off, we're going to have a short period of Nahwu, and then a short Nasiha. I'll probably give preference to the Nahwu so that we can get through this stuff quicker, as some have already done the asbab of Raf. Right, so inshallah we'll have our lesson on Ismu Kaana and its sisters. We'll continue with that inshallah. We have a short Nasiha. Thereafter, Mullah Irshad will join you. We'll have a short break, and then I'll come back, and then Mullah Khalil, inshallah, for Quran sessions. Right, now with the second year class, what I was doing at the beginning of every class was revising the Sarf scales, the Mazid fee scales, in addition to the Nahwu, just because we learned it earlier in the year and we didn't want to get rusty with it or anything like that. Do the latter years know it better, such that they don't need that revision? Because then I'll just delegate that to the second years to do on their own. But if not, it just takes about 2 minutes. We can do our Sarf scales at the beginning. Any input? You guys want to say our Sarf scales again? Those beyond second year. Okay, so let's do it. We start off, we just say the scale. Sometimes we say it with the extra set of root letters, right? From scale number 2, fa'ala, until the 10th scale. So let's all just say that together quickly once. Bismillah. Fa'ala, yufa'ilun, taf'ilan, mufa'ilun, mufa'alun, fa'il, la tufa'il. Let me just put it on the screen for you as well. Next scale. فاعل يفاعل فعالا مفاعلة مفاعل مفاعل فاعل لا تفاعل. Fourth باب. أفعل يفعل إفعالا مفعل مفعل أفعل لا تفعل. Fifth باب. Understand? تفعل يتفعل تفعلا متفعل متفعل تفعل لا تتفعل. Sixth scale. تفاعل يتفاعل تفاعلا متفاعل متفاعل تفاعل لا تتفاعل. Seventh scale. انفعل ينفعل انفعالا منفعل منفعل انفعل لا تنفعل. Eighth scale. افتعل يفتعل افتعالا مفتعل مفتعل افتعل لا تفتعل. Ninth scale. افعل يفعل إفعلالا مفعل إفعل لا تفعل له. Remember this one, we leave out the majhul form and we leave out the ismul maf'ul as well, because generally it doesn't get used like that. Right, 10th scale, استفعل يستفعل استفعالا مستفعل مستفعل استفعل لا تستفعل. And the purpose we were revising these scales is simply because, well, for the second year they just learned it this year and we wanted to get it drilled into their heads. But I think it's very important still to maintain your knowledge and to revise those scales so that you are able to do exactly the purpose for which we learned them. Identify verbs, identify which form they are on, and then derive the appropriate meaning from the root letters. Right? Because we know these abwab, they have different connotations. Right? Can you remember them? Second bab? I can actually pull that up for you as well. What are some of the main connotations of those abwab? The qualities of the abwab. The second bab has the quality of causation, intensification. Sometimes it's the same as the first bab, or sometimes it's a new meaning. But the most common one is that of causation, right? Actually, causation, intensification, I would say, are close. The third bab has the meaning of mutuality. So, if you know these connotations or these qualities of the abwab, and you know the meaning of the root letters, you can oftentimes form a meaning for the word, or at least understand in a very raw sense where the meaning of the word comes from. Right? It's very important. Af'ala, the fourth scale, again, causation, sometimes a new meaning, or we can say that it makes the verb muta'addi, makes it transitive. The fifth scale, it has a reflexive meaning, to cause something to the doer itself. Right? Like ta'allama. Allama means to make someone know. Ta'allama mean to make oneself know, or to learn. Right? So I have the meaning of graduality, over a period of time, or a new meaning. Tafa'ala, again, mutuality. Sometimes to fake something as well, to feign something. Infa'ala has an intransitive meaning. If qata'a means to cut something, in qata'a means for something. Qita'a will mean to break. I think that meaning is wrong over there. Or another example would be fajjara will mean to cleave something asunder. In fajjara will mean for something to just, to split apart by itself. Then the eighth scale, ifta'ala, has the meaning of doing something for oneself. Like hada means to guide, ihtada means to be guided oneself. Again, here's the other examples. Ittasaba, to earn for oneself, or it can have a new meaning. If'alla usually means to be or become a color. Iswadda, ibyadda, ihmarra, isfarra, ikhdarra. Those will mean all to be those colors or to become those colors. Right? And obviously you need to know the color associated to the root letter. Ikhdarra, to be green, ihmarra, to be red, ibyadda, to be white, iswadda, to be black, isfarra, to be yellow, etc. Izraqqa, to be blue, etc., etc. And the 10th scale, istaf'ala, has the meaning of seeking out something, or talabu shay, to request or seek out something, or it can mean to regard or deem something. Like, for example, istahsana, to deem something good, istaqbaha, to deem something bad or ugly. Right? Well, please send us those mazid fi qualities. Okay, I'll do that, inshallah. Please remind me if I don't do it, or I'll just ask the students to send it to you, inshallah. Right. So that's it for mazid fi scale. Going forward in the coming weeks, inshallah, we'll just say the scales, maybe do put a new set of root letters in that, and just see how the meaning changes on each of the abwab. Right. That's just a quick refresher on that, and now we go back to our Nahwu. So the lesson we're doing in Nahwu is the lesson of Kaana and its sisters, right? And I gave you a little bit of an introduction to both Kaana and Inna last week, and the components of a sentence with Inna and Kaana. What are the components? You have the ism of the sentence, the ism of Kaana or one of its sisters, and then the khabar of Kaana and one of its sisters. And what did we say here? What's the rule there? What hal is each part in? The ismu Kaana is in halatul rafa, and the khabaru Kaana is in halatul nasb. Right? So we're not focusing on the nasb part of it. We're just focusing on the ismu Kaana part. And that ismu Kaana, what does it really take the place of? It takes the place of the mubtada. Right? And so I find it really helpful to just keep an example in your mind, one sentence in your mind as an example that will, encapsulate all of these rules for you. If you remember the sentence, كان الرجل طويلا, you can make up any other sentence that tickles your fancy, but this is an example that's in the book and it's pretty easy. كان الرجل طويلا, the man was tall. كان الرجل طويلا. I can identify from there that the first word, what was the mubtada, now we call it the ismu kana. الرجل is in raf, and طويلا is in nasb. So just, for all of these lessons that we learn, in fact, I think that's what helped me greatly. I would just keep an example, one example in my mind of a maf'ul bihi, of a mubtada, of a khabar, whatever it may be, of a sentence that starts with inna, if it may be, just keep one example in mind, and that encapsulates a lot of rules for you, right? And essentially, as we go forward, we're not really going to be fixated on the rules. We want to understand the correct meaning, right, and derive the correct meaning from sentences. So, what does adding a kana, one of its sisters, do to a sentence? Right? What happens? Number one, we generally add it at the beginning of a sentence. And with the case of kana, it changes the meaning from present tense to past tense. Right? And we said that for any one of its sisters, whichever meaning is associated with that sister of kana, that's what it will change the meaning to. For example, we had the other sister, Laysa. Laysa is not going to change it to past tense necessarily, but it's going to negate the sentence. Right. Then what will you say next? What was called the mubtada, we're now going to call the ismu kana, and it's going to remain in raf. What was called the khabar of our sentence, we are now going to call the khabaru kana, but its hal is going to change from raf to nasb. Right. And then we had our example, kana rajulu tawilan. We can see a rajulu here is the ismu kana and it's in raf, and tawilan is the khabar and it's now in nasb. And then we said that, the same applies to any of the sisters of Kana. It's just that the meaning is going to change in accordance with what is appropriate to that sister of Kana. However, the mubtada is going to be called the ism of that thing. Like, for example, if I have Laysa, I'm going to call it the ismu Laysa. Right? But it's going to stay in a raf. And the khabar will be called the khabaru Laysa. And it will change to nasb. Right? Pretty simple. What were those sisters? We had Kana, Ma Kana, Laysa, Asbaha, Amsa, Mazala, Kada, Madama. And we learned the meanings as well. Right? And then just two more points. We said, although Kana usually changes the meaning to past, it can mean present or future, depending on the context. So the normal rule of Kana changes to past tense. But sometimes it doesn't do that. But there'll be a rhetorical benefit to still using kana. Like sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. What does that mean? If you just take it literally, what kind of meaning was? Allah was correct. Allah was most forgiving, most merciful. But we know Allah doesn't change. So contextually, because of that piece of knowledge that we have, that Allah doesn't change, we know that it can be translated as well. And Allah is
Yes.
Ghafur Rahim. But there's a rhetorical benefit to it. It's not as if Allah just put the Kaana there and there's no benefit to the Kaana. Right? We can understand from that something like the idea that Allah was and always will be Ghafur Rahim. You follow? So it can be translated in the future or present tense depending on the context. And that was one example that we had over there. Brilliant. Yeah. The question was, can the ismu kana mean, or can kana mean were as well, depending on what the ismu kana is? Yes. And like I alluded to last week, kana is a type of a verb, and that's actually our last point here. Kana and its sisters are a special category of verbs which we have here called naqis, what we call al-fi'lu naqis, a deficient verb. Right? They don't create what we call a verb-based sentence, but they come at the beginning of a noun-based sentence. In addition to what's mentioned there, that they're called a special category of verbs, the ism of kana can change just like a fa'il can change on a verb. So how do we change the verb on a scale? I mean, on a normal fi'al? If in remember kana is past tense, the ending changes, right? So let's say one of those scales, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alna, fa'alta, fa'altum, fa'alti, fa'altunna, fa'altu, fa'alna. Now, since kana is a verb as well, and its sisters are all verbs as well, though deficient verbs, they're still verbs, right? They change in the same way. So how will it sound? Kana, kanu, kanat. And now here's where it becomes a little bit tricky because it's a weak letter verb. Right? So what's the root letters of kana? Kaf, waw, and noon. If you have any questions here online as well, I'm saying kana is a form of a verb. And its sisters are also forms of verbs. Right? Deficient verbs, though they may be, they have root letters, as other verbs do. But most of them, as you can see, have a weak letter in them. Kana, the root letters of it is kaf, waw, noon. The masdar is kaun. Ma kana is the same. Laysa, you can see the root letters are lam, yasin. Asbaha, it doesn't have a weak letter. You can see it's obviously sad, ba, ha. Amsa has a weak letter at the end, but it's at the end here. Mim, sin, and then it's either waw or ya. All right. Mim, sin, waw for amsa. Zala, yazulu, za, waw, lam. Right? Kada, yet kada, yakadu, there's a different verb, kada, yakidu, which means to plot. Kada, yakidu, kaidan. Here we have kaf. I think it's ya, dal as well. Almost. But there's a difference between kada, yakadu, and kada, yakidu. Let me just see something. Actually, the roots for kada, yakadu is also kaf, waw, dal. Sorry, kaf, waw, dal. So it's kaf, waw, noon, za, waw, lam, and kaf, waw, dal, and dama is also dal, waw, mim. Those are the root letters. Okay, so yeah, so I stopped at a certain point, right? And I want to explain to you why. The scale is going to change a bit. because these are weak letter verbs. Now, did any of the classes do weak letter verbs? Where you get the weak letter either at the beginning or in the middle or at the end. We call it mu'tal, ajwaf, or first mithal, ajwaf, naqis, depending on where the weak letter is, if it's the first letter or the second letter or the third letter. Okay, if not, I'll just explain to you something quickly. So they change like this. Oftentimes, if you know the past tense and the present tense, and you can figure out how it's going to change. Kana, what's the present tense? Yakunu. Kana, yakunu. Right. Kana and then yakunu. So when we go down the scale, just listen to yakunu. It's indicative of the waw as the root letter, right? And also it's going to indicate to you how the verb's going to change. So listen to how we say the scale. Kana, kanu, kanat. Then the next one is going to be kunna, kunna, right? And then it will be kunta, kuntum, kunti, kuntunna, kuntu, kunna. Right? I'm going to say that again. Why is that the case? How am I going to say? How will I add that short noon to the end of kana? There's no way of doing it. Because you're going to have two sukoons next to each other. Yeah, but you see what happens is you have two sukoons next to each other. And when that happens, then the weak letter just falls away. Right? How are you going to say? How are you going to say kana plus a tat in it? Because if you look at the rest of the scale, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alna. From fa'alna, there's a sukoon on the lam, the last letter, isn't it? And then you have the added thing. Look at the next one. Fa'alta, sukoon on the lam. Fa'altum, sukoon on the lam. Now try and put a sukoon on the noon of kana and then add it. You can't. Because you don't have a haraka on the letter before that. And you can't have two sukoons next to each other. So what we do? We just kill the weak one. Right? And then the haraka on the first letter takes the letter or goes in accordance with the root letter that it replaced. So what did I tell you? What was the root letter of kana? Kaf, wow, noon. And what haraka goes with a wow? Dhamma. What haraka goes with a ya? Kasra. What haraka goes with a alif? Fatha. Right? However, yeah, the weak letters are usually going to be a wow or ya. So it will change in accordance with that. So since the root letter, the middle root letter of kana is a wow, when we change kana, when we come to that fa'alna, we drop that wow. We drop that weak letter. But because it's a wow that we drop, we put the dhamma, which goes with a wow, on the first letter. Right? So kana, kanu, kanat. What's the next one? Kunna, kunta, kuntum, kunti, kuntunna, kuntu, kunna. Let's try kada. The verb is kada, yakadu. Right? Kada, yakadu. And you can hear from the present tense, we're not making it yakudu. Kada, yakadu. So how do you think this one's going to change? It actually comes in the Quran. لَقَدْ كِدْتَ تَرْكَنُ إِلَيْهِمْ شَيْئًا قَلِيلًا. So let's say this girl. Kada, kadu, kadat, and then it's going to be kidna. kidna. It's either be, yeah, this one's a bit crazy here because it's wow, right? Kitta, and then it's going to be so kitta, kittum, kitti, kittunna, kittu, kidna. Yeah. And dama, the root letter is also wow. Dama yadumu. There it follows. Dama yadumu. Okay, let's say it follows that when it, no, I can't say that. Dama yadumu. Let's say that one. Dama, damu, damat, dumna, dumna, dumta, dumtum, dumti, dumtunna, dumtu, dumna. Right. Okay, I think J is going to go to a kasra. Like if you take zala, for example, it's going to be zala, zala yazalu, like kada yakadu, right? There it also goes to a kasra. Zala, zalu, zalat, zilna, zilta, ziltum, zilti, ziltunna, ziltu, zilna. To be honest with you, I didn't have a rule in my mind for it. I just know it. Like, you just become okay with it. Yeah. Weak letter verbs, you can learn whatever rules you want to. Once you get a feel for it, you know it. Until you get a feel for it, yeah, you are.
How do you go across the scale? Like, how would that make sense? Kind of mean was.
كان يكون
No,
كونا.
in translation. How would you use?
Okay. كان will be the past tense. Let's first just say it. Right? كان will be the past tense. يكون will be the present tense. كونا will be the masdar. كائن will be the اسم الفاعل. مكون will be the اسم المفعول. كن will be the أمر. لا تكن will be the نهي. So كان will mean was. يكون will mean is. كونا will mean being. Right? Feel like كون is just the act of being. كائن is something that is. مكون, I don't think that will have meaning in this context here. And then kun will be the amr, be. لا تكن, don't be. Be as in to exist. That's what it will mean. Yes. Assalamu alaikum. As it goes down the abwab as well. No, I'm saying it goes down the abwab as well. So they work just like verbs. Now my question to you is, that thing that we're changing at the end, if we said the kind of doesn't form a verbal sentence, right? What are we going to call that thing that we're changing at the end? Kanu. What's that wow over there? That we change like we normally change the fa'il. Remember last week I also told you, Kaana is a little bit like a verb. But what would have been the fa'il, we now call the ismu Kaana. So that thing that we're changing at the end, Kaana, Kanu, that wow is going to be my ismu Kaana. Kanat is going to be the standard feminine form, so it's going to be the here inside. That, yeah, if it's not mentioned on the left. Kunna, that noon at the end is going to be the ismu Kana. Kunta, that ta at the end is going to be the ismu Kana. Kuntum, the same thing, the tum. Kunti, the ti. Kuntunna, the tunna. Kuntu, the tu. Kunna, the we, the na. Those are all going to be now my ismul fa'il. So, for example, I can say, if I want to say we were all young, we were all small. We were all small. I can say, kunna sigaran. kunna sigaran. So in the sentence, it just looks like I have the kunna and then I have a word in nasb. But if I ask you to analyze a sentence for me, what will you tell me? There's a kana there at the beginning, right? But we have it in the form kunna. What's the ism of kana? The na. What hal is it in? The ismu kana is always in raf. That was our rule. So it's in raf. And what is the khabaru kana? Sigaran, which is in nasb. Kunna sigaran. You understand? So this kana is like straddling the jumla ismiya and the jumla fi'liya, right? In terms of how it changes and how the ism changes, it's like a verb. And in terms of how the main primary component is in raf and the secondary and the khabar is in nasb, it's like a verb. But it's a deficient verb. So it doesn't form a verbal sentence. That's why we have a specific name for it. The ismu kana and the khabaru kana, rather than just calling it the fa'il and the maf'ul. Right? Okay. So we have an exercise here. The purpose of the exercise, number one, for you to translate the sentence. كان الناس أمة واحدة ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا. But what I want you to do for me is to translate these ayat, right? But I also want you to identify for me the ismu kana. And it should be very easy because it's just like finding a fa'il. How do you find your fa'il? Ili. That same rule applies here. Either it's at the end of the verb, like we had with kunna, kunta, kuntum, all of those things. Or it's to the left, if the one that you have is kana or kanat. Or if it's neither one of those that have something at the end, nor is it explicitly mentioned to the left, then it's going to be inside. What's inside kana? Standard masculine. Huwa. What's inside kanat? Here. Right? So just like a verb. Except that we're not going to call it now fa'il, we're going to call it a ismu kana. Right. Let me see if there's any. And again, we must identify kana with sisters and then translate it with a meaning that's appropriate to that. Like for example, here we have by number 12, وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا. The mother, or the heart of Musa alayhi salam's mother became empty, if you want. فَارِغًا literally means empty. Yes, you can do the whole page. So I was actually going to have you, I was actually going to have us break up in groups and do it. But the time doesn't permit that for us now, otherwise we're going to throw everything back. What we've essentially done now is the next lesson as well. In looking at those similarities between kana and a verb, we've done the next lesson as well. Ismu kana and its sisters, the advanced lesson 1.6. So we have here, the crux of that lesson is kana and its sisters are unique as they are verbs and therefore follow the same past and present tense verb patterns as shown below. Kana, kanu, kanat, kunna, etc. However, they don't create a verbal sentence and are in fact a sign of a noun-based sentence. So I told you that idea that this thing is straddling like the jumla ismiya and the jumla fi'liya. Because kana and its sisters, they are verbs, but they don't create a verbal sentence. Any other verb creates a verbal sentence, right? So the verbs, they don't create a verbal sentence. In fact, they show us that what we're dealing with is a nominal sentence, a jumla ismiya. However, the mubtada of the sentence, what we now call the ism of whichever of the kind of sisters it is, you look for that like you look for a verb, right? And it's khabar you look for like you look for a maf'ul bihi. So in that way, it's very similar to a verbal sentence. So question. So if we analyze a sentence, what label does kana get? Well, kana will just be called a fi'l naqis. right? It will be called a fi'l or fi'l naqis, efficient verb, as opposed to a fi'l tam. And therefore, I mean, so we have those scales there that you can learn, and we have those points that I spoke about just listed there for you. The ism kana can therefore be found at either the end, left, or inside the verb, ili. The khabar kana can take various forms as explained in the types of khabar lesson previously. Right? The ism kana can be delayed to after the khabar kana, as explained previously in the delayed mubtada lessons. It's like I told you, it's like half jumla ismiya, half jumla fi'liya. So the rules of the khabar apply to the khabar of kana, the forms that it comes in. The rules of the mubtada apply to the ismu kana and the forms that it comes in. But just that kana is a deficient verb, one of its sisters, right? But for next week, inshallah, what I want you to do is simply go through the exercise on page number 16, inshallah, right? So when we come to class next week, we're going to go through those examples. We'll thrash them out. You can tell me, what you understood, what you didn't understand. If you had any questions, we'll then just quickly revisit lesson 1.6, and as group work, do the exercise on page number 18. And depending on our time, we'll move on to the next lesson. We'll leave that for the following week, right? So our time is up now, and as I told you, I will prioritize this over the nasiha because some of the classes have already done all the marfu'at. So the quicker we get that done, the quicker we're all on the same playing field. So inshallah, we'll end there for now. Are there any questions before we end? Sure. Right joke. This guy have any brothers? Well, I don't know why they call it the akhawat of Kaana. Any other questions? Right. So here we have a amr, and then we have a jawab for that amr. So Allah says kun is a amr. So for example, say amr is always directed to something, right? A second person. So say for example, okay, none of us have creative power like that. But say for example, I just say to this desk kun, be, or the idea of the desk, whatever the case may be, right? Then what we understand from it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to a thing, kun, be, fayakun, then, so that's indicating to me, that fa is indicating to me that it's coming as a response to the amr. Then what happens? Yakunu. What does yakunu mean? If kana is was, yakunu is. Right? And what's the ism of kana? Of yakunu? Nothing means. So how do we look for it? Yakunu is a standard form, right? Isn't it? If you look at the scale here, it's a standard masculine form. So there's nothing at the end. Where do I look next? To the left. Fayakunu, there's nothing on the left. Where do I look next? Inside. And what's inside yakunu? Huwa, right? Which can translate as he or it. So kun, be, fa, then yakun, it is. Right? Kana is was, yakun is. So Allah says to a thing, إذا أراد الله إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا. Allah's decree or Allah's command when He wants something, إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول, is that He says kun, He says be, fayakun, then it is. You understand? So kun is a fi'l amr. Fa indicates the jawab of that amr or that talab. And yakun is a present tense verb that is essentially the follow-on of that jawab, of that response. It's like if I tell you, come, then I will tell you something. There's a talab, I'm requesting from you to do something. Come. And then if you come, what's going to happen? Then I will tell you something. Do salihat, then you will get Jannah. You have a command and then a response to that command, right? Or consequence of that command. So similarly, kun fayakun is that kind of thing. It's an amr and then it's a jawab, right? We call it talab and the jawab talab. Right. Okay. So we end there for now, inshallah. Homework, page number 16. And then we'll take it from there next week. If there's no other questions, then we'll end there for now. وجزاكم الله خيرا وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To those online as well, we're going to be having a nikah in the mosque at 10 o'clock. And usually when that takes place, for those of you that were here before, you would know that what we do at that time is we try and disconnect the speakers so that the noise doesn't enter the classroom. But if it does, then it's very difficult to, overpower the masjid speakers. So then we might have to take a break at that time. Is our break at that time? I think our break from 10 to quarter past. Okay, perfect time. Just so that you know that that's happening, inshallah. All right, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.